like those songs that I miss Tom and wish he were here. And I am an uncertain trumpet when it comes to directing music. Anyway, we're looking at the book of Samuel. A number of years ago, I was able to hear Kathy Tricoli sing. She's a Christian artist. And in reading some of the things that are going on in her life, she at the time was 40 years old and unmarried, unable to, no children. And she was at that time of life when she was looking back and saying, why didn't I get married? Why didn't God provide me with a husband? Why didn't God provide me with children? But then she realized that God was providing her with children. As she performed at concerts around the country, around the world, people would come up to her because of a song that she performed about a baby who offered up a prayer to God in thanksgiving to the baby's mom for letting the baby live. It was a song about being born and coming into this world. It was a song about abortion. It was a song about the gift of life. And woman after woman would come up to Kathy and say, thank you for that song. Because of that song, my child is alive today. Because of that song, there's a baby in the world. And Kathy says, you know, God revealed to her that all of these babies that were born because of that song are her babies, are her kids. Well, we learned today about a woman named Hannah who was not able to have children either because God had closed her womb. And yet God moved in her life and answered her prayer, and she set in motion a whole chain of events that resulted in Jesus Christ really coming into this world because of one woman who was faithful in this world. Now when talking about Samuel, we need to talk about the book of Judges. In the Hebrew Scriptures, Samuel follows right after Judges. Ruth is put way at the end, sort of an addition. Not way at the end, that's Chronicles. But Samuel follows right after the book of Judges, and there's a distinct connection. In the book of Judges, we read about people who were spiritually inept. They had no clue what God wanted them to do. We also read about sexual misconduct, especially on the part of the religious leaders in the book of Judges. We also read about tragic military encounters that were going on in the book of Judges. Bad things happened when they went to war, at least at times. Well, all three of these things happen in Samuel, right there at the beginning. So there is this connection that the author wants to make. Eli's sons are involved in sexual misconduct with people that were ministering there at the tabernacle. There is the lack of spiritual insight on the part of Eli and his family. There were tragic military encounters, which we'll see in the next few weeks, as the Philistines even captured the ark and hauled it off out of the land of Israel. And so we have this connection with Judges. The opening 7 chapters talk about the rise of this great man whose name was Samuel. But it begins by focusing on his mom, on Hannah. What a strange way to begin, especially in their world. In their world, Hannah wasn't strange, but in our world, Hannah is. But in their world, starting to talk about it with a woman is just, why would you do that? They had a much different place in their society than we have now. And then it moves to the house of Eli and what Eli was doing as a priest in bringing down the nation of Israel and not leading them spiritually like he should have. And it talks about the result of these priests' sin. And yet, the book of Samuel tells us that all was not lost. There would arise a man who functioned as both priest and prophet. And that is an unusual combination as well. Samuel was both of those. But it begins with Hannah's faith. They were a nation in crisis. They were a nation that was out of control. They were a nation that was out of God's will. They were a nation that the world had just imploded on. And so the change begins with this woman of faith named Hannah. It was a very ordinary prayer that set this all in motion and a very ordinary birth of a child into this world. But human actions and situations can only be evaluated in light of eternity. I don't know that anybody realized what happened when Hannah had a child. Nobody realized what happened when Hannah prayed. But God set in motion this huge chain of events that changed the world. We also see that power is not found in our position in our society, but our posture before the Lord. And Hannah was humble before God. And that changed the world. It changed eternity. Hannah was a spiritual powerhouse. She may have been a nobody in this world, no one with any power, nobody with any prestige, nobody with anything except spirituality. And she changed the world. Hannah alone understood what true change was about and how she could change her world. Spiritual power will always triumph over social power. We need to understand that. As we go out on Life Chain this afternoon, we need to realize that spiritual power, it's the prayers that are offered up on this day that change things. Not the fact that we are protesting, not the fact that we're holding up a sign, not the fact that we lobby Congress. Spiritual power will triumph over social power. But let's take a look more closely at the story. It opens with the story of Hannah and how she became a mom. It begins in a place called Ramathaim. We don't even know where this is. We think it means two heights, two hills. But we really don't know where this town was. In fact, we are given two different names. If you were listening closely or reading closely, in one place it calls it Ramathaim, and another place it calls it Ramath. You know, I don't know if one was a nickname or a shortened name, but this is where it begins. Now, I mentioned earlier that Samuel was both prophet and priest. In Samuel, it almost implies that he is an Ephraimite. But in Chronicles, it says that he was a Levite. And so what we think is going on here was that Samuel geographically was an Ephraimite, but genealogically he was a Levite living in the land of Ephraim, in the state of Ephraim, in the nation of Israel. Well, we also run into this man named Eli. He was supposed to have this spiritual competence. He was the priest. He was the high priest. He had been high priest for a long time. It seems in this story that he'd turned over some of his power to his kids. As he'd gotten older, he wasn't able to physically do all the things that they were required to do. But he was still supposed to be guiding Israel. Then we have Elkanah, who is introduced as having two wives, one named Hannah and one named Peninnah. One meaning gracious woman and one name meaning pearl. Now, Elkanah is this example. By the way, if you really want to know what it means to have more than one wife in this world, we don't practice polygamy anymore. Back then it was fine. Actually, the New Testament says